The echo of battle reverberated through the deep expanse of space as Captain Aaron Rise stared out from the command deck of his warship, his mind still racing from the events that had unfolded. The Exareth Dominion had underestimated the humans. They had thought of Earth as a weak planet, unworthy of even being considered a threat. But Aaron and his crew had proven them wrong. The human forces had successfully pushed the invaders back, even capturing one of their prize ships. The battle had been fierce, full of blood and fire, but in the end, victory was theirs. But victory, it seemed, came at a price. As the enemy ship was dismantled, and their forces were scattered, the Exareth had offered Aaron a reward for his triumph. It was customary in the galaxy for victorious commanders to receive gifts, a symbol of respect, a token of gratitude. But Aaron wasn't prepared for what they presented to him. The prize wasn't gold, technology, or territory. It was a living, breathing being. She stood before him now, her head lowered in submission, her long alien hair cascading down her back like a veil. She was taller than most humans, her skin a pale blue that shimmered under the cold light of the ship's interior. Her eyes, deep and reflective, seemed to tell a story of pain, one that Aaron could barely begin to understand. She was a slave brought before him as an offering, a symbol of the Exareth Dominion's power and cruelty. They called her Solara. Aaron felt his stomach twist. He had heard of such practices as slavery in its most brutal form, where conquered races were forced into servitude, their lives reduced to nothing more than property. It was a dark reality that Aaron had long fought against in his own home, but to see it so directly in front of him, it shook him to the core. The room fell silent. The alien officials who had been present in the battle were watching him closely, waiting for his reaction. They expected him to accept the prize with the same cold detachment they would have shown in his place. It was a gesture of superiority, a reminder of who held the power in the galaxy. Yet, as he looked at Solara, he could not bring himself to feel triumph. She stood still, not daring to meet his gaze, her eyes fixed on the floor. Her hands were bound, but not by chains. The physical restraints were light, but the psychological ones seemed far heavier. There was a sadness in the way she held herself, a kind of resignation that Aaron couldn't quite grasp. This was no longer about winning a battle. This was about a life, a person who had been reduced to nothing but an object. The idea of taking her as a prize made him sick to his stomach. The Exareth officials spoke, their language sharp and cold, but Aaron hardly listened. His thoughts were consumed by one question: what kind of leader would he be if he accepted a human being as a prize for victory? His heart pounded in his chest as the gravity of the situation set in. This was the moment that would define him, not just as a military commander, but as a man of principle. Would he stand by humanity's values, or would he become just another conqueror, a figurehead of the very system he fought against? There was no time to waste. The weight of their expectations was growing heavier, and the silence was suffocating. Without thinking, Aaron spoke. "I will not accept this," he said, his voice steady but filled with conviction. A ripple of surprise passed through the Exareth officers. They were not accustomed to such defiance. Their leader, a tall figure with black markings across his face, looked at Aaron with a mixture of confusion and contempt. "You are a fool, human," he spat, his tone laced with venom. "You were given a great gift, a prize worthy of your victory, and you throw it away." Aaron stood tall, his chest swelling with determination. "This isn't a prize. This is a person, just like me." The room grew even more tense. The alien leader sneered at him, but Aaron didn't flinch. He had made his decision. He would not take part in the Exareth's barbaric traditions. Solara's eyes shifted upward, meeting his gaze for the first time. There was something in her look, a flicker of disbelief and hope, all tangled into one. She had been given no choice in her fate, no say in what happened to her, but now, for the first time, someone had spoken up for her. Not as an object, but as a living being. The tension in the room was thick, but Aaron didn't care. His decision was made. "She's free," he said, his voice firm. The words hung in the air, and for a moment, no one spoke. The alien leader's face twisted into a grimace, and the other Exareth officials muttered among themselves in their harsh tongue. But Aaron paid no attention. His focus was on Solara. He had seen the faintest glimmer of hope in her eyes, and that was enough to solidify his choice. Without a second thought, Aaron approached her, extending his hand. For a moment, she hesitated, looking down at his hand, unsure of what to do. She had been trained to obey, to submit, and trust was a currency she had long since abandoned. But there was something different about this human, something she couldn't quite explain. Slowly, she raised her hand, placing it into his. The simple touch felt like a bridge between two worlds, one where oppression reigned and one where, perhaps, freedom could exist. The Xerath officials were furious. Their leader hissed, his voice rising in anger. "You will regret this, human. You do not understand the consequences of your actions." But Aaron only nodded, his gaze unwavering. "I understand more than you think." Turning away from the group, he led Solara out of the room. Behind them, the tension in the air remained, but the door closed behind them with a resounding thud. As they stepped out into the cold corridor of the warship, Aaron couldn't shake the feeling that this was only the beginning. The Xerath Dominion would not let this go easily. But for now, the prize was no longer a symbol of victory. It was a choice he had made for himself, for Solara, and for the future. And as he walked beside her, he knew that this was the first step in a journey neither of them had expected to take. The corridors of the warship were cold and silent as Aaron led Solara through them. Her steps were hesitant, each one echoing against the metal walls, as though she were walking through a world she didn't recognize. Her eyes were fixed on the ground, her body tense, as if bracing for the next blow that might come at any moment. Despite the freedom Aaron had given her, Solara seemed like a caged animal, trapped by invisible chains that no one could see. Those chains were not physical. There were no shackles on her wrists or ankles. They were the scars of a life lived in servitude, the weight of years spent under the control of the Xerath Dominion. Aaron glanced at her from time to time, trying to gauge her thoughts. He had hoped that by freeing her, he would see some spark of joy, some sign of relief in her face. But all he saw was fear, a fear deeper than anything he could imagine. It was as if she didn't know how to exist in a world where she was not bound by the demands of another. There was a distance in her eyes, a quiet sadness that made Aaron feel as if he was walking beside a ghost. They reached a small room near the ship's medical bay, a temporary place for Solara to stay until they figured out what to do next. Aaron stepped aside to let her enter first. She paused at the doorway, her fingers brushing against the frame, hesitant to cross the threshold. It was as though she feared the room might close in on her, trapping her once again. "It's not much," Aaron said softly, trying to make her feel at least a little comfortable. "But it's yours for as long as you want it." She didn't respond right away. Her gaze was distant, her mind clearly elsewhere. Aaron wasn't sure if she had even heard him. The silence between them was thick and heavy, as though every word he might say would only make things worse. Finally, she stepped inside, but it wasn't with the eagerness of someone accepting their new freedom. Instead, it was like she was entering a cage she thought she might never escape from. Aaron wanted to say something to ease her discomfort, but the words caught in his throat. He could see that she was not yet ready to embrace this strange, uncharted territory of freedom. To her, it must have felt like an illusion, something too good to be true. How could she trust something so alien to her, something she had never known in her life? "I know this is difficult," Aaron said finally, taking a step closer, but still maintaining some distance. He didn't want to push her too much. "But you don't have to be afraid anymore. You are free, Solara. You can do whatever you want. No one will harm you here." Solara remained silent, her eyes downcast. She stood motionless for a long while, her fingers trembling slightly as she touched the wall beside her. Aaron felt a knot tighten in his chest. He couldn't help but wonder if she would ever believe him. Could she even begin to imagine a life without fear, without the constant threat of someone pulling the strings? After what seemed like an eternity, she finally spoke, her voice so quiet it was almost a whisper. "I've never been free." Her words hung in the air, heavy with the weight of everything she had endured. "I don't know how to be free." The vulnerability in her voice struck Aaron deeply. It was clear now that the chains Solara carried were not just physical. They were memories, scars that ran deeper than any wound. The fear of freedom was something Aaron had never considered, but now he understood it. To be free was not just about having the ability to walk wherever you wanted, to go wherever you pleased. It was about trusting that you would not be controlled again, trusting that you were worthy of a life without fear. He wanted to help her, to tell her that everything would be okay, but he knew it wasn't that simple. Solara had lived her entire life under someone else's command. She had been trained to obey, to serve. Freedom, for her, was a foreign concept, like a language she could not understand. I don't know how to make you believe me, Aaron admitted, his voice heavy with regret. But I can try. I want to help you. We'll figure this out, together. Solara didn't answer, but she looked up at him then, her eyes filled with a silent plea. There was something in her gaze that made Aaron pause. She wasn't asking for freedom in the way he had hoped. She wasn't asking for a new life, or for everything to change at once. What she was asking for, in her own way, was something simpler: trust. The trust to believe that he meant what he said. That she wasn't a prize, or a weapon, or an object. She was a person. Aaron stepped back, giving her space. He didn't want to push her further. Instead, he placed a small metallic device on the table, a communicator he had been using to stay in contact with his crew. If you need anything, if you want to talk, just use that, he said gently. I'll be nearby. You don't have to be alone. Solara looked at the device for a moment, as if weighing her options. Then, slowly, she nodded. Aaron wasn't sure if she truly understood the weight of his offer, but he hoped she would come to realize that he meant every word. I'll be back soon, he said, his voice softer now. Just take your time. There's no rush. You're not a prisoner anymore. As he turned to leave, he glanced back one last time. Solara hadn't moved. She was still standing by the wall, her eyes distant once again. But there was something different now, something fragile yet powerful. For the first time, she wasn't trapped by the fear of the unknown. She was simply waiting. He didn't know what would come next, or how long it would take for Solara to trust him. But he also knew that there was no turning back. The Exarath Dominion might come for her, for them, at any moment. But for now, Aaron had done what he could. He had given her the one thing she never thought she would have: freedom. And as he walked down the dimly lit corridor, he couldn't help but wonder if freedom was something that could truly be given, or if it was something that had to be earned, piece by piece, one small step at a time. The days after Solara's release were tense, filled with uncertainty and cautious steps. Aaron had hoped that, in time, she would start to trust him, to believe in the freedom he had promised her. But each time he checked in on her, she remained distant, her eyes closed off as if she were still trapped in the same chains, only now they were invisible. She barely spoke, and when she did, her words were clipped, hesitant. It was as if she had learned to exist in silence, to wait for instructions, to move only when told. Aaron's heart grew heavy with each passing day. He knew the weight of the past was not something that could be erased overnight. Solara had lived a life he couldn't fully understand, a life of subjugation and constant fear. He had never been forced to live as a prisoner, to serve at the whim of others. He had fought battles, led soldiers, and earned victories, but this was different. Solara wasn't just a prize, and she wasn't someone to be fixed or saved. She was a person, someone with a history, with scars that went deeper than the skin. The ship had been quiet, its crew focused on their duties. Word of Aaron's decision to free Solara had spread quickly, and there were whispers in the halls. Some respected him for his choice, others questioned it. They had won the battle, but the war was far from over. The Exarath Dominion was not a force that would simply walk away. The very fact that Aaron had defied them, had freed a slave, was an act of rebellion that they would not ignore. Rumors circulated that the Exarath were already preparing to retaliate. But Aaron wasn't concerned with their threats. Not anymore. It was a quiet morning when Aaron decided to approach Solara once more. He had spent days trying to find the right words, trying to understand what she needed. But no matter how hard he tried, she remained closed off, trapped in a silent world that he couldn't break through. But today felt different. Something in the air seemed to shift, a weight lifting, though Aaron wasn't sure why. Perhaps it was just his own sense of urgency. Something had to change, and it had to change now. He found her in the small room she had been given, sitting in the same position she had been for the past several days, staring out the window. The stars outside were peaceful, their light distant and cold, much like the silence between them. As he entered, she didn't look up, but Aaron didn't let that stop him. He had learned to respect her silence, but he also knew that silence could be a cage. "Solara," Aaron said softly, stepping into the room. She still didn't respond, but he wasn't going to give up this time. He stepped closer, his voice a little firmer now, though not forceful. "I know you're afraid, but you don't have to be. I promise you. You're not alone." For a long moment, she said nothing. Her back was turned to him, her head tilted slightly, as though listening to the hum of the ship's engines. But then, to Aaron's surprise, she spoke, her voice so soft it almost felt like a whisper of the past. "I don't know how to trust you, Aaron." The words were simple, but they cut deeper than any blade could. "I've never known a life where I didn't have to obey, where I wasn't someone's property." Aaron's heart tightened. He moved closer, sitting down on the edge of the bed, though he made sure to give her space. "You don't have to obey me," he said quietly, looking down at his hands. "You never did. I didn't free you to make you serve me. I freed you because you deserve to be free." Solara didn't reply immediately, and Aaron wasn't sure if his words had even reached her. He could see the way her shoulders remained tense, the way she clenched her fists in her lap. It was as if the weight of freedom was too much to bear, as if she didn't know how to carry it. But Aaron didn't look away. He wasn't going to let her retreat back into silence, into the safety of the cage she had built around herself. "I know I can't change everything for you, Solara," Aaron continued, his voice filled with sincerity. "But I can promise you this, you don't have to live in fear anymore. Not here, not with me. I'm not asking you to forget your past. I'm asking you to take a chance. To trust that there's a world outside of the chains." Solara's breath hitched, and for the first time, she turned her head slightly, just enough so that Aaron could see the outline of her face. Her eyes were filled with something he couldn't quite place: fear, yes, but there was something else too. Something raw. Something vulnerable. "You don't understand," she whispered, her voice breaking. "You think freedom is something you can just give. But I've spent my entire life living in a cage. I don't know how to exist outside of it. I don't know what it means to be free." Aaron wanted to reach out, to pull her into his arms, to reassure her that everything would be okay. But he knew better than to push her. Instead, he simply nodded, his gaze softening. "I don't expect you to understand it all at once. I just want you to know that I'm here. I'm not going anywhere." The silence stretched between them, but it wasn't the suffocating kind of silence that had defined their previous days together. This was different. It was a silence of understanding, of two people acknowledging the weight of what had been said. Slowly, tentatively, Solara turned fully to face him, her eyes searching his face for something. For truth. For something she could believe in. "I'm not asking for your trust, Solara," Aaron said quietly. "I'm offering mine. And that's all I can do. What happens after that is up to you." Solara didn't say anything for a long time, but the air between them had changed. There was something fragile in the way she looked at him now, as if she were seeing him for the first time. Her shoulders had relaxed, just a little. Her breath was less ragged. It wasn't much, but it was enough for Aaron to know that he had made some kind of progress. Finally, she spoke again, her voice barely above a whisper. "I don't know how to live without chains." Aaron looked at her, a small, sad smile tugging at the corner of his lips. "Then let's figure it out together. One step at a time." For the first time, Solara met his gaze fully, and in that moment, something passed between them. It wasn't a promise of a perfect future or an easy road ahead. It was just a simple understanding. They were both broken in their own ways. They both had scars that couldn't be erased. But maybe, just maybe, they could heal together. Outside the window, the stars remained unchanged. The universe was vast, cold, and indifferent. But in this small room, For a brief moment, there was warmth, a flicker of humanity, of hope, against the darkness of the cosmos. And it was enough. The days that followed were filled with an electric tension that hummed through every corner of the ship. The quiet whispers that had circulated about Solara's freedom had quickly transformed into something more. It wasn't just the crew who had heard the rumors. The Xerath Dominion had caught wind of Aaron's actions, and they were not pleased. Messages had begun to arrive, warning of the consequences, speaking in cold, clipped terms about retribution and punishment. It was clear that the Xerath would stop at nothing to make an example of Aaron, and they would take their anger out on whoever stood with him. For Solara, the threats loomed like dark clouds on the horizon, growing larger and more inevitable by the day. It wasn't just the looming threat of the Xerath that weighed on her. It was the growing realization that her freedom came at a cost, one that might be too high for her to pay. The more she understood about the world beyond her cage, the more terrified she became. She had only ever known oppression, the cold grip of chains, and the demands of others. To think that the people she was now surrounded by were willing to risk everything to protect her, it was too much for her to process. But the truth was, the ship's crew, Aaron's crew, had become more than just allies. They had become her family. And that was what frightened her the most. She wasn't sure if she could handle being cared for, being loved, without it somehow breaking her. Aaron, too, had felt the mounting pressure. His decisions, his choices, were no longer just his own. Every action he took, every word he said, rippled out and affected the people around him. The Xerath were watching, their forces growing, their anger boiling over. They had underestimated humanity before, but no longer. The threat was real. One morning, as Aaron walked through the command deck of the ship, he noticed the tension in the air. The crew was on edge, whispers passing quickly between them as they worked. There was a look in their eyes, a silent acknowledgement that the battle was far from over. The ship's captain, an old war-hardened veteran named Admiral Markov, approached him with a serious expression on his face. "Aaron," Markov began, his voice low, "we've received word from our intelligence networks. The Xerath are assembling a fleet. They're not just coming for you, they're coming for everyone who stands with you." Aaron's stomach tightened. He had known the threats would escalate, but hearing it so directly was another matter. How soon? Within days. Maybe sooner. Markov's eyes were hard as steel. "We need to make a decision. If we stay here, we'll be sitting ducks. But if we run, if we fight, we could stand a chance." Aaron nodded, his mind racing. The decision wasn't as simple as it seemed. Running would only delay the inevitable, and they couldn't afford to appear weak. If they didn't fight now, they would lose everything they had gained, everything they had built. But the risk of failure, of losing everyone, was a heavy burden. "We'll fight," Aaron said, his voice firm, filled with the weight of responsibility. "But we need to prepare. We need to make sure we have allies. We can't do this alone." Markov gave him a nod of approval. "I'll start rallying the crew. We've got old friends we can call in. It's time to remind the Xerath that we're not just a ragtag group of rebels. We're a force to be reckoned with." As Markov left to carry out the plan, Aaron found himself alone in the war room, staring at the large map of the galaxy displayed on the screen in front of him. His fingers hovered over the holographic buttons, but he didn't press any of them. His thoughts drifted to Solara, to the woman he had freed. In the short time since her release, she had become more than just a survivor. She had become a symbol of defiance against the Dominion, a symbol of hope. But what would it mean for her if they fought and failed? The weight of that question hung heavily on Aaron's heart. She had already lost so much. Could he ask her to risk everything again? Could he ask her to believe in the cause, to fight for a future that seemed uncertain at best? He closed his eyes, pushing the thoughts aside for the moment. There wasn't time for hesitation now. There wasn't time for fear. The Xerath were coming, and the only choice left was to stand and fight. The ship began to stir in the days that followed. The crew moved with urgency, preparing for battle, securing supplies, and reinforcing the ship's defenses. Aaron led them with a steady hand, his determination never wavering. even as his thoughts were torn between his duty to his crew and the growing bond he felt for Solara. She, too, had to make a choice. She couldn't stay in the shadows any longer, not if they were to survive. It was on the third day after the announcement of the impending Xerath fleet that Aaron found Solara standing on the observation deck, looking out at the stars. There was something different about her that morning. The fear that had gripped her for so long was still there, but beneath it, there was something else. A quiet strength. A resolve. She turned to him as he stepped closer. "I'm ready," she said, her voice calm, almost serene. "I know you've been fighting for my freedom, but now I'm ready to fight for my future." Aaron was taken aback by her words. He'd had expected resistance, fear, maybe even a refusal to get involved. But this was different. Solara wasn't the frightened woman who had stepped off the slave ship months ago. She had changed, grown somehow. And now, she was offering herself to the fight, offering herself to the cause. "Are you sure?" Aaron asked, his voice soft. Solara nodded. "I've lived my life in chains. But those chains aren't just physical. They're in my mind. They've kept me from believing that I could be more than just a tool, more than just a slave. But I don't want to be that anymore. I want to fight. I want to be free." Aaron's heart swelled with pride, with gratitude. He had never expected this. He had never thought that Solara would be willing to join the fight in such a way. But here she was, standing beside him, offering not just her trust, but her strength. "I don't know what the future holds," Aaron said, his voice low. "But I do know this: we stand together. Whatever happens next, we do it as one." And as the crew prepared for battle, as the fires of rebellion began to burn bright in their hearts, they knew one thing for certain: they were no longer just fighting for survival. They were fighting for something greater, for the right to be free. For the right to choose their own destiny, no matter the cost. The moment of truth had arrived, and the tension on the ship was palpable. The final preparations for battle were underway, and every crew member moved with purpose, their faces grim but determined. The once quiet ship now hummed with energy, its engines roaring as they prepared for the fight that would determine their fate. Aaron stood at the center of it all, his mind racing with thoughts of the upcoming battle. The Xerath fleet was close, too close, and every decision, every move, mattered. But even with the storm of uncertainty raging around him, there was something else, something more. It was Solara, standing at his side, her presence stronger than ever. She had changed since that first moment of silence in her room. No longer a frightened prisoner, Solara had become a symbol of hope, not just for the crew, but for herself. Her decision to fight alongside Aaron and the crew was no longer a choice born of necessity, but of conviction. She had faced her fears, and now she was ready. Aaron looked at her, a silent question in his eyes. She had grown so much, from the woman who had not known how to exist outside of chains to the person standing next to him now, filled with determination and purpose. Her transformation was complete, and Aaron knew that she was no longer the same woman she had been. She was strong, and she was ready to fight. "We're not just fighting for our lives anymore," Aaron said, his voice steady, though the weight of what they were about to do pressed heavily on his chest. "We're fighting for a future. For freedom. For the chance to choose who we want to be." Solara nodded, her gaze fixed on the view outside the observation deck, where the dark expanse of space stretched endlessly before them. The stars seemed distant, cold, but she no longer felt alone. She had found a family here, people who believed in something bigger than themselves. People who were willing to risk everything for a chance at a future. And for the first time in her life, Solara was ready to fight for that future. The ship's alert system suddenly blared, interrupting the quiet moment. Aaron and Solara both snapped to attention, their eyes locking. The time had come. The Xerath fleet had arrived, and it was massive. Thousands of ships, each one a weapon of destruction, moved through space like a storm, a force that could wipe out everything in its path. But Aaron refused to back down. He had already made his choice. There was no turning back. The battle began almost immediately. The crew worked together with an intensity that could only come from years of preparation and trust. The ship's weapon systems powered up, and the shields hummed with energy, ready to absorb the first wave of enemy fire. The calm had been replaced by chaos lasers flashing, alarms blaring, and the ship shuddering under the impact of enemy blasts. But the crew held their ground, fighting back with everything they had. Aaron commanded from the bridge, his every order sharp, decisive. He moved like a man with purpose, his eyes never leaving the screens that displayed the incoming Zareth forces. But even as the battle raged around him, his thoughts were never far from Solara. He had promised her that they would fight together, and he would keep that promise. She had come so far, and now, she was part of something bigger than herself. She was part of a movement, a revolution that would change the course of history. Meanwhile, Solara had joined the crew in their battle stations, not sitting idle, not waiting to be protected. She was by Aaron's side, helping to coordinate the defense, her eyes sharp, her mind focused. She had found her place in this fight. She was not just a survivor anymore, she was a warrior in her own right. The thought of fighting for a cause, for her freedom, for the freedom of others, it fueled her every move. The battle grew fiercer with each passing minute. The Exareth were relentless, their attacks coming in waves, overwhelming at times. But the crew of the ship fought back with everything they had. It was a war of attrition, each side pushing forward, testing the limits of endurance and will. At one point, the ship took a direct hit, and alarms began to blare as the hull trembled under the force of the impact. The lights flickered and the crew was thrown into a momentary darkness before the emergency systems kicked in. Solara was knocked off her feet, but she quickly regained her balance, scrambling to her feet as chaos erupted around her. Aaron's voice rang out over the comms, calm but authoritative. "All hands, brace for impact. We're not done yet. Keep fighting." Solara's heart pounded in her chest, but her resolve remained unshaken. She knew this wasn't just a battle for survival, it was a battle for the future. The Exareth may have had the numbers, but they lacked the one thing that made them vulnerable, the human spirit. As the crew fought to stabilize the ship, Solara found herself in the heart of the action, assisting with repairs, coordinating the defense, doing whatever it took to help them hold their ground. Each task she completed felt like a victory, a small step towards something greater. The more she fought, the more she felt the chains of her past breaking away, piece by piece. Then, just as it seemed the battle might be slipping out of their control, something remarkable happened. The other ships in the fleet, the allies Aaron had quietly contacted in the days leading up to this fight, appeared from the shadows, emerging out of hyperspace like a fleet of angels. They were here. Reinforcements had arrived. The Exareth, caught off guard by the sudden appearance of a new enemy, faltered. The tide of battle began to turn in humanity's favor. The surprise reinforcements brought a wave of hope to the crew, igniting a fire that burned brighter than ever. They fought with renewed strength, with determination, and soon the Exareth began to retreat. Their ships, battered and broken, started to pull back, their forces fractured. Aaron watched the battle unfold from the bridge, his heart racing with a mix of adrenaline and relief. The Exareth were losing. They were being pushed back. The crew had done it. They had fought back against the empire that had once seemed unbeatable. Solara stood beside him, her face lit by the glow of the battle outside, her eyes wide with wonder. She'd never seen anything like this. It was the first time in her life that she had truly felt what it meant to be free. To be part of something bigger than herself. To fight for a cause she believed in. "We did it," she whispered, her voice filled with awe. Aaron nodded, his gaze fixed on the retreating Zarath ships. This is just the beginning. As the last of the Exarath ships vanished into the depths of space, the crew erupted in cheers. They had won. But Aaron knew that this victory, while sweet, was only the first step in a much larger war. The road ahead would be long and uncertain, but for the first time, there was hope. The dawn of a new era had begun.